It is your Wednesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope you guys are having a great day out there. Really good show coming up. Rachel Blount from the Star Tribune joins me here in just a little bit to talk PWHL Minnesota. Becoming one of the newsiest beats in Star Tribune sports in the last, few weeks, winning the championship, then parting ways. That's a nice way to put it, with Natalie Darwitz, firing her essentially from her post as general manager very soon after winning that championship, and then hosting the draft here earlier this week, hearing it from fans over the Darwitz situation, everything else going on with this team, not endearing themselves really to fans right now. Rachel and I will get into just the whole kind of back and forth with what happened with Darwitz, where this franchise is right now, and how, if you were hoping this was going to be a coronation, a celebration, it's been anything but in the last couple weeks for PWHL Minnesota, but what the path might be from here forward. So Rachel and I will talk about that in just a little bit. She's been covering that story very well. Got plenty of other stuff to get to as well. Some NBA stuff towards the end of the show, in addition to a Gopher football commitment news that Randy Johnson and I didn't get to yesterday because it happened after he and I talked. We'll get to that here in a little bit, and got some Twins thoughts in just a second. First, though, what did I miss? Let's start with the Lynx today, because this is getting interesting. I think we're beyond the point where this is just a nice little start to the year for the WNBA Minnesota Lynx. 9-3 now. Just beat Las Vegas in Vegas last night, defending champs. Vegas sputtering a little bit right now. That was Vegas' third loss in a row, so probably a good time to be playing Vegas as they're kind of hitting a little bit of a lull. But the Lynx are in anything but a lull. 9-3 on the season now. A really convincing win over Vegas. Everybody contributes, tons of ball movement up and down the lineup, tons of contributions up and down the lineup. That's kind of been the story all season, but that was a turbocharged version of it in their 100-86 victory over Vegas. And let's just look at their season as a whole now. 9-3, best record in the Western Conference, 9-3, third overall in the 12-team WNBA, and their wins have been impressive. They have 3 wins already against Seattle. Seattle's 8-4. So 8-1 Seattle is against everybody else. 0-3 against the Lynx. Lynx already have a win over New York, and another great team. I think they're 11-2 right now. Another team ahead of the Lynx in the standings. One of the Lynx losses was an overtime heartbreaker at Connecticut. Connecticut is 10-1 this season, so that was one of the other losses for the Lynx this season. To Connecticut, could have gone their way. Kind of a controversial call towards the end of that game that didn't go the Lynx way, but that is not a bad loss in any stretch of the imagination. Like I said, Connecticut just 10-1 on the season already. One of the other Lynx losses was to Vegas here in Minnesota a couple weeks back. They avenged that in that win last night. Other loss was a buzzer beater at Phoenix a few days ago. So those are their 3 losses. Two buzzer beaters essentially against Connecticut and Phoenix, 2 good teams on the road, and 1 loss to Vegas, the defending champs. Everything else, quality win over New York. New York, a very good team. 3 quality wins over Seattle. Now this quality win over Vegas. They are beating good teams. They are going toe-to-toe with the very good teams in the league. Is this then a team that we should be thinking about as not just, hey, probably going to make the playoffs, see what they're going to do, to thinking about this team as, hey, is this a legitimate contender for a deep playoff run and maybe a title? I think we have to start talking about them in that category now, based on who they've beat so far, how they've played so far, the continued rise of Napheesa Collier, which I didn't know if she had more to her game because she was already so great. She has added more to her game this season, and then the complementary pieces around her that they've brought in this season. Kayla McBride has been here for a while, but she's shooting the lights out this year. Bridget Carlton's been on fire too, but all these other kind of complementary pieces around the Lynx best players have been kind of a perfect match chemistry-wise. They talk about it almost every game, but that is what is getting it done for them right now. And if you went into the season thinking, maybe this will be a good team, but maybe not all that great. And even at the beginning of the year, they were not being talked about. Their national profile was not very high at all. I think we have to change that conversation right now. They are a contender right now. Where that goes from here, we don't know, but they are a legitimate WNBA contender right now, and the latest step in that evolution was beating Vegas on their home court last night. As for the Twins on Tuesday, the news wasn't nearly as good. Louie Varland was great, summoned from St. Paul to give the rest of the rotation a day off. He pitched 5 scoreless, only 1 hit allowed. Did not get to face the Colorado lineup a third time through, though. Caleb Thielbar comes into the game in the 6th inning, gives up a bunch of hits, a bunch of runs. Twins eventually lose 5-4. Score got closer in the end when Carlos Santana hit a 2-out, 2-run home run in the 9th. Not enough, though, for the Twins. They lose. 2-game winning streak snapped. We'll see if they can get back in the winning column today. Bobby Nightingale Jr. expected to join me, by the way, on Thursday's show to talk a little bit more about this team, the up and down Twins, where they are right now after 60 plus, almost 70 games, kind of settling in what we know about them, the return of Royce Lewis, things like that. But right now, they're okay. They're settling in kind of to what they are, but I think they still lack a certain identity. And I think that's what Bobby and I'll get into a little bit. Like, I don't know what this team does particularly well, because I'm not sure they do anything particularly well at this point, because they've been so hot and cold, so up and down, that there's not really an identity emerging with this year's team. So I'm sure Bobby and I will get into that a little bit more tomorrow, but kind of a disappointing one yesterday. Colorado's not a good team. You get 5 shutout innings from a guy making kind of not an emergency start, but a spot start. You'd like to be able to take advantage of that, and they were not able to do that at all on Tuesday.
I'm Nyla Jean Myers, Senior Assistant Sports Editor at the Star Tribune. Thank you for listening to Strip Sports Daily Delivery. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast and our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
Let's talk PWHL Minnesota hockey with Rachel Blount. I guess saying hockey kind of says hockey twice, doesn't it, Rachel? Sorry about that.
Yeah, I guess it's a little repetitive. Sorry. You
suddenly cover one of the newsier sports beats in town. They won the championship a few weeks ago. That was a huge, great story. Continues to be a huge and great story, but a lot has happened since then. They were greeted at the airport after they came back from Game 5. Everybody's like, celebrating this, and rightfully so, after this kind of, weird end of the regular season where they lose a bunch of games, but then go on this playoff run. Since then, the vibes have taken a bit of a turn, Rachel, with the departure of Natalie Darwitz as general manager, some of the reasons behind that, and that kind of tension a little bit carrying over to the draft, which was held in St. Paul Monday night. How would you kind of sum up what it was like to be in the building Monday, as they're choosing players, as ostensibly this is a happy moment, but there's still this tension right now in what should be a celebratory time?
I've heard so many people say this over the last few days, that this is why we can't have nice things in Minnesota sports, right?
Right.
You win a championship and immediately it goes into the gutter with this giant controversy. It was 9 days, Mike. 9 days after they won the championship, and then everybody's excited and it's this feel-good story. And then suddenly Darwitz is gone, and it looks like we've got some villains here, and it looks like we've got a league that doesn't quite understand Minnesota, and everybody's feelings have immediately turned from, isn't this great, this new team won a championship, to what the heck is this new team in this new league doing? This is not good. So the vibe last night at the draft was very mixed. People, I wondered if people would show up, and they did. There were a few other people there that showed up, that came to Roy Wilkins Auditorium. There were people that lined the purple carpet, which is where the prospective draftees were coming in, and some of the current players in the league. They were very enthusiastic. These folks were wearing their PWHL Minnesota gear. And so there was clearly a feeling of, they were excited about the league, ready to welcome some new players, look ahead to year 2. However, there were people there that are still very upset about Natalie Darwitz's departure. There were a handful of people that brought signs about that. Lots of people talked about it. The first time Ken Klee, the coach, went up on stage to make a draft pick, he got booed.
Wow.
And it was interesting. And the biggest boos came when the draft was televised on the league's YouTube channel, and Clay Mathick, who was the studio host, this was being piped into the auditorium. And when Clay just simply mentioned, well, Natalie Darwitz isn't with the team anymore, oh my gosh, loudest boos of the night, huge boos and cat calls and people yelling stuff. And so that just really struck a nerve. So very, very mixed feelings last night. A lot of anger still there, but people still also wanted to support the team in the league.
You've covered this from the beginning, so this is very just interesting in general. But for the uninitiated on kind of how this league works, it's different from a lot of leagues. Like, explain how the decision on Natalie Darwitz gets made, because it's not from Minnesota. It's basically from the league standpoint, right? That they make all the personnel decisions, or like those kind of hiring decisions and who's in charge.
That is correct. So the league structure is there are 6 teams and they are all owned by a single entity. Mark Walter, the Los Angeles Dodgers owner, he is bankrolling this league, he and his wife, Kimbra. And so they essentially own all the teams. And that makes the league the central authority here. The league is the entity that hired all of the general managers. That's who hired Natalie Darwitz back in last August, was the PWHL. Now, the GMs then got to name their coaches originally, but when Darwitz's choice for coach left the team a couple weeks before the season, Darwitz did not have the opportunity to choose the next coach. That was the league that stepped in. They said, Klee has already been vetted. He already applied for positions. He was interviewed for positions earlier. So he's going to be your guy. So yeah, that does add a layer of strangeness, of uniqueness to this that you wouldn't see in other pro sports, where it's the league that makes these decisions. And then it was the league that decided that Darwitz needed to be out. And they say that this came after a number of internal and external reviews. They are not willing to tell us what those reviews said, but they also claim that based on these reviews, they saw a situation where it could not be resolved, which honestly, that doesn't sound very plausible to me. We see GM coach disagreements all the time in sport.
Oh, yeah.
They are not uncommon. And it's not very often that somebody picks a side and pushes the other one out instantly. I mean, this all just happens so fast. It seems to me that particularly given everything with the way this league works and what this league is, that I can't understand why they didn't try harder to say, look, you guys have to coexist. We'll bring in an arbitrator. Yeah. We'll bring in whatever we need here, but you guys are just going to have to figure this out. And that's the real mystery to me, why the league decided that this was such an unsolvable problem that someone had to lose their job.
Our reporting basically suggesting there was a power struggle between Ken Klee and Natalie Darwitz, and that Ken Klee had the support of some pretty prominent players. Does that pretty much sum it up?
It does. It does. So Ken Klee coached the U.S. national team from roughly 2014 to 2017, coached them in a couple of world championships. So players like Kendall Coyne-Schofield, Lee Steckline, Nicole Hensley, Ken Klee goes way back with them. He has longstanding relationships with those players. And from what we are hearing from sources that aren't ready to go on the record yet, we know this. We know that Klee interviewed to become GM and coach at Minnesota back in August. He did not get either job. Natalie gets the GM job. She hires her own coach. So already, I think you're kind of setting yourself up for an uncomfortable situation at the very least when you then bring Ken Klee in as coach of the team that he wanted to be the GM of. So you've already got, potentially a conflict there. And when he and Darwitz didn't get along when they had this personality conflict. Well, these extremely influential players, because all these veteran players are very influential in this league, they lined up behind Klee. They have longstanding relationships with him. And the way it appears is that it was a simple power struggle, that the league decided one of these people had to go, and the players had more sway with the league officials than Natalie Darwitz did. And I think it all boils down really to one player, and that's Kendall Coyne Schofield.
Okay.
Boils down to her because without her, there's no PWHL. She is the person that made that phone call to Billie Jean King a few years ago saying, I want to try to get a new women's pro hockey league started. There's a bunch of us willing to work on this. We need financing. We need some help. Can you help us? And Billie Jean then connected them with Mark Walter. So it's that phone call from Kendall Coyne Schofield that is the genesis of the PWHL. And I think because of that, she has a huge amount of power, not simply with the team, but with the league. And I have a feeling, and again, this is based on reporting from people that aren't ready to go on the record yet, that whatever Kendall wants, Kendall gets.
Do we even know, was there a reason given when the original head coach Bergerath left kind of right before this all started, or was that just, was there any kind of, because that feels like, that's Darwitz's hand-picked coach, right? Like none of this probably happens if that doesn't happen, just kind of playing this out. Because what you just mentioned now, like how there's this tension maybe because Ken Klee wanted to be the GM, didn't get hired for these jobs, and then all of a sudden he's here because the league puts him here. Like that kind of chain of events this is fascinating, but like I don't want to like play up the controversy too much, but just the layers to this are fascinating to me.
Oh, I completely agree. Regarding the first coach, personal reasons is all that anyone has said. And the speculation is that when he hadn't coached for a while. Charlie had been retired from coaching for quite a while. And the speculation is that once he came in and really dug into this and saw what was going to be involved, that he decided maybe this was not a job that he wanted after all. And Natalie said, well, okay, we can agree to that this isn't a great situation, and we can agree that we'll just part ways here. So at this point, we haven't confirmed anything about players pushing him out or how that might have happened. That at this point, it seems like that truly was a mutual decision that he would not remain the coach. But yeah, then I can understand on one hand, it was a bit of a crisis situation. The league was days away from starting play, and suddenly Minnesota doesn't have a coach. So I get that, but still, I'm not sure the league used very good judgment in putting Ken Klee into this situation where he's suddenly working for a person that beat him out for the job that he wanted.
By the way, they won a championship, like you said, that's like a couple of weeks ago, and this whole thing, like this probably feels less weird. There's still a lot of controversy to it, but it feels less weird if, say, they continue on that 7-game losing streak and lose an eighth straight to Toronto and just get swept out of the playoffs. But instead, they rally, win that series, beat Boston. They're the champs. Like, how do you think just the fact that they won the championship, frames up this whole controversy? Because it feels less controversial to have a parting of ways after you lose 8 straight to end a season as opposed to the turnaround they had at the end of the year.
Completely agree. I completely agree. And in fact, I think that some people that were not really engaged with the PWHL became engaged with this controversy for that reason. It's sort of similar to the idea that St. Thomas got kicked out of the MIAC for winning too much. People that didn't care about D3 athletics, that seemed so outrageous to them that everybody, suddenly that's national news. And in this case, GM gets pushed out of her job after a team wins a championship. I think people that were not necessarily PWHL fans all year heard that and they're like, what? Right. How did a team win a title and suddenly the GM gets booted? That doesn't make any sense. I think that has a huge part in how big this has become, because it takes away the main reason that the league could have cited for Natalie Darwitz leaving. When she wins a title, suddenly then, what's your reason? What reason do you give your fans, your spectators, interested parties? What reason do you say? Well, they really haven't. They've fallen back on this idea of, well, we had these reviews and we got information that told us that there was a conflict here that was unresolvable. Well, again, gosh, winning solves a lot of problems. After they won a championship, there was no time to sit down again and say, can't we smooth this out? Look at this. We were successful. Clearly, these folks all worked together well enough to win a title. So I think that's a huge piece of why this is blown up so much, is it just makes no sense in the sports world to get rid of a GM that has just won a title.
You did a huge piece on Natalie Darwitz. It was, I'm sure you were reporting it for a lot of the season, but it ran, was it right before the playoffs that it ran? But correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, correct. Yeah, before the playoffs first round, the semifinals.
And, just talking about everything she had done to kind of put this roster together, things like that, maybe revisiting that, like how much she put into this. I know she hasn't been quoted in this. She's had I think she had a quote in a release or a short statement, but like, where do you imagine her head is at right now in all of this, just especially with everything she's put into it?
Yeah, I think she's crushed by this. I mean, this is her dream as much as anybody's, to have this women's professional league that is truly professional. And here they finally got the resources to run a women's professional league in a major league kind of way, to give players a truly professional experience. Natalie worked her tail off to do that. Everybody on that staff, to be fair, it's not just her, but everybody on that staff worked very, very hard to give these players the best experience they could possibly give them. And I'm sure that she feels very hurt at getting pushed out after having done that. And it's interesting too, Mike, about just the market here. Another layer to this is Natalie Darwitz is an icon in this market. Yeah, she is a huge, huge part of our hockey community. Everyone in the state of Minnesota knows her. She's highly regarded. She's well respected. She's a person that, in fact, some people at the draft last night, some fans, said they got interested in this league when they heard she was going to be the GM. That made it legitimate in their eyes. And they said, well, Natalie Darwitz is involved. Well, gosh, I'm in. I want to see what's going on here. So the league was smart in hiring her and incredibly dumb in pushing her out the way that they did. If there's truly a problem, they've got to be upfront about it and explain it to people, because now not only are you pushing out a GM that just won a championship, but you're pushing out a GM that's very well liked and very popular and very well known in this state. And who, by the way, the league itself has acknowledged maybe that team wouldn't have played in XL. Maybe they wouldn't have practiced in TRIA, the two best facilities in the Twin Cities, had it not been for Natalie Darwitz's connections. So, now they're in a position where they're telling us that, well, we'll hire the best person for the job, for the GM. I was told by one of the league officials that, well, if it's a Minnesotan, it's a bonus. But I don't think they, to this day, understand the importance of connections in the Minnesota hockey community. If they bring someone in that's not part of our hockey community here, are they going to get another deal done at XL, another deal done at TRIA? Are they going to continue to get donors? I mean, Darwitz is lining up donors to build a new space specifically for PWHL at TRIA Rink, their own locker room, their own dedicated space. Well, if she's not there, or some other iconic figure in Minnesota hockey isn't there, are those donors going to write those checks? Maybe not.
And that brings me to a couple final things. One, circling back to the draft, that kind of Minnesota angle. We overplay it sometimes. People have been like furious when the Wild don't draft the Minnesotan and things like that. And there's, you can only be so provincial, but there are tons of good players that come from Minnesota. It's just a fact. And Natalie Darwitz's first draft, I think, 7 of 15 rounds.
15, correct.
They went with Minnesota players. This this draft on Monday was 7 rounds. It's smaller because it's not not the inception of the league. But no Minnesota-born player. You had like a St. Cloud State connection, but this was definitely not a Natalie Darwitz draft. A much different direction under this different regime.
Very much so. Darwitz's thinking last year was, as a startup league, a startup team, she felt like if there were players on the team that were familiar with the fans, that would be helpful. That if you're trying to pull new fans in, you're trying to create a new fan base, if you've got familiar faces, players maybe that they watched at the U or players that they watched in high school, they've read about, they've heard about, that helps build your fan base. And clearly that was not a consideration at all this time. Ken Klee did say last night that Abby Barine, who played as a replacement player for PWHL Minnesota last year, she had to go into the draft this year since she was not full-time last year. And Klee said last night, well, she was 100% part of our plan, but the pick didn't line up properly. Well, she went at number 17 to Montreal. So, she was 100% of your plan, but 17 is fairly far down. And they picked 3 players already before her. So, they could have had her. There were other good Minnesotans on the board, but yeah, clearly that was not a consideration. They were looking for something else last night in the draft, and whether or not a player was from Minnesota was clearly not part of the equation at all.
Can't imagine that the fact that a woman lost a power struggle to a man has been lost on this fan base. Has that been brought up? Is that something the league has had to address in any way, or is that just not part of this equation?
I actually asked that question on a conference call Saturday with Jana Hefford, who's the league's senior vice president of hockey operations. And she said it would be unfortunate if that is the narrative.
Okay.
However, it is.
It's part of the narrative. I mean,
people, yeah. She might think it's unfortunate, but yeah, there are any number of people that have said exactly that. This is a women's sports league, and now you have a conflict between a female leader and a male leader, and the league sides with the guy. And the optics aren't good. I heard this echoed last night at the draft from fans that I talked to, from some women that were very upset by the way they described it. Was a woman finally gets a place at the table in a professional sports league, and then she gets shoved out by a man. And the league has to recognize that's exactly how this is playing with some people. They might not like that. And the league has, after I asked that question, I was told, well, just remember, we've got 3 general managers still that are women, and we've got a lot of women leaders in the league structure. I get it. That's great. That's wonderful. However, in this particular market, it looks like the man won the power struggle with the woman. And that's some fallout that I think the league is going to have to deal with. I don't think that's going away anytime soon either.
With all this controversy, and there's other stuff that bubbled up at the draft Monday night, like where do they go from here? What's next? Maybe we can kind of leave it there. Like, how do you think this plays out support-wise in year 2? It's a championship team that had great support. The whole league had great support. It's like not at all what they want to do. What they wanted this draft to just be like the culmination of this celebration and the championship run, everything like this. Like, where do you think this leaves them kind of going forward and these unresolved questions going forward?
There were people that I talked to last night that they're very conflicted right now. And I have a feeling that this is probably a common emotion in their fan base right now. People are angry about Darwitz, but they still want to support this league. They still believe in the league. They believe in the team. They like the players. They want it to succeed. So they don't want to necessarily withdraw their support. There were some folks last night that said, well, I just bought my season tickets for next year, and I'm kind of not happy about that right now. But I think those folks will ultimately continue to support the league, to continue to go to games and buy the merch and watch games on YouTube and do all the things that fans do to support their teams. But I also don't think the ill feeling about the league is going to go away. I think the support's going to be like compartmentalized.
Yeah.
They want to support the players and the team. They don't want to support the league administration. Yeah. They're going to continue to be angry at those people, and they're going to continue to have a chip on their shoulder. Some people have even wondered, some fans have even wondered, is this a sign that the PWHL doesn't value this market? Is this a sign that Minnesota's just not important to them? They don't, because the fact that they don't seem to understand the very unique dynamics that we have in Minnesota sports, that perhaps they aren't willing to understand that, and the market does not mean so much to them. There are folks that have raised that possibility. Does this mean that Minnesota is kind of an outsider in this league? It's not a favored team among league officials, and there's some bad feeling about that as well. So I think the league is going to continue to feel some fallout from fans as a leadership structure, but I do believe the fans are still going to support the team itself.
That makes a lot of sense, even if not much about this makes sense. Rachel, tremendous reporting on all of this. I hope maybe you have some things that aren't so controversial to write about in the coming days and weeks, but we'll see about that.
Yeah.
We'll see about that. But yeah, until next time, keep reading Rachel's stuff. It's been just a fascinating team to kind of cover, I'm sure, in the last few months, just everything that's unfolded, the championship, this Darwitz stuff, the draft being here, everything like that. It's you don't get that all the time. You don't get these kind of like, just kind of like wild rides, but it was a wild ride in year one for PWHL Minnesota.
Yeah, you know what? I have to think back to my very first job here when I covered the North Stars, and they made that run to the Stanley Cup final, and then they moved.
There you go.
Yep.
There you go. It's deja vu. They're probably not going to move, but yeah, it is a wild ride, and it is Minnesota sports, right? As soon as something good happens, we are always bracing for something bad to happen. Well, Absolutely. Rachel Blount, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Mike.
Great stuff from Rachel. Hope you enjoyed that breakdown. It does sound to me like this was kind of hasty, right? Like maybe it just seems that way because of the timing of it, and this was really a long, kind of drawn-out investigation. But you get to the end of the season, they win a championship. Like Rachel was saying, like these kind of power dynamics happen all the time in sports. Does it really mean someone has to go? And does it really mean the someone who had to go was Natalie Darwitz? What are going to be the ripple effects of that on this franchise in years to come? We don't have the answers to that right now, but it does not look good right now. It does not look like good optics for this team on multiple fronts, and we'll see what else emerges in the days and weeks to come. Let's finish with the cooler. A couple quick things. One, Kristaps Porzingis injured for the Celtics again. That could turn their series against Dallas. Game 3 tonight in Dallas. He's battling a kind of a rare injury, it sounds like. Questionable for tonight, but man, it sounds like when there's destabilization in a certain area of your leg, you don't want to mess with that. So we'll see if he's able to play and what he's able to give. They are a much different team when he is on the court right now. So pay attention to Porzingis and his availability in Game 3. Celtics up 2-0 in that series over Dallas. Dallas, of course, coming back to earth quite a bit after beating the Wolves in 5 games in the Western Conference Finals. And you don't see this every day. A recruit has reflipped. Started out with Wisconsin. This is a defensive lineman from Wisconsin, Torrin Petaway. Started out giving a verbal to Wisconsin in March. Gave the Gophers a verbal commitment 3 weeks later, but then yesterday flipped a second time back to the Badgers football program. Twists and turns. I don't know. Signing day's not for a while. We'll see where this winds up. Maybe this is his final flip, but I have not seen that very often where a guy starts one place, flips to another place, then flips his commitment back to that place, all within like a 3-month span. This is, I don't know if this is a reflection of the era we're living in or if this is just a one-off, but I do not recall seeing that level of commitment being flipped in a college football recruiting scenario. That will do it for me today. Like I said, Bobby Nightingale Jr. expected to join me on tomorrow's show. Until then, have a great rest of your Wednesday. I'm Michael Rand, back at it again tomorrow.